we'll go on the code enforcement group. To some extent, this is something that's been going on for a very long time. And code enforcement did a survey around the city. It was an online survey. And then they were going to hold 6 meetings. They actually got about 300 responses to their survey. And then they were going to, people said, I want to participate in these ongoing meetings. So they actually decided to break it up into 6 groups and hold 2 meetings a day for 3 evenings during the week. And it turned out that their response was a little underwhelming, so they backed it off to 3 meetings. And like I said, in the last meeting, Berta and Spence and I attended, and I pointed my video camera at the charts, at the chart presentation, so you can see what went on. Well, to some extent, what they're agreeing is that changes in the codes are necessary. And changes in the codes are definitely necessary. It's not something that we just started talking about. We've been talking about this with them since 2008. So it's not something that's new. And they said they wanted public participation in the process. And to some extent, I think it surprised them a little bit about what's happened. Now remember, this is going to be the effects on your neighborhood, because you may have a community preservation officer, a code enforcement officer knocking on your door and saying, you know what, this doesn't comply with this or that, and they want you to fix it. So first of all, what they did was they turned around and they said, what do you think is important? These are kind of questions like asking, do you think it's important that we have air in Santa Clarita? Do you think it's important that the water is clean? Do you think it's important that we can drive on the streets? And so typically you get very high marks for these. And what it says is, what do you think is important that affects your neighborhood? Junk and debris? Everybody wants to see junk and debris in their neighborhood, right? So people say, yeah, that's an important item. Weeds, chipped paint, which is really what we talked about initially as dilapidated buildings, inoperative vehicles, illegal signs, unpermitted construction, and illegal fencing material. And those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 highest rated items. And I think that kind of surprised them, because I would have suspected that they would have gotten concrete in the front yard as one of the highest ones. But concrete in the front yard only scored 62%, and you can see how important that is, because it was right in line with people who are concerned with having clotheslines in the front yard. Now, I don't know, has anybody seen lately a clothesline in the front yard? You have? Where?
I've seen clothes thrown over bushes in the front yard.
Well, where? Where?
In our track.
I haven't seen any clothesline in the front yard, but okay, I'll look some more. Maybe there is. Anyway, that's one of the things they think was important to ask about. Trash bins in the public view, and garage conversions. So I think this surprised them a little bit, because I think that they thought that some of these things would have scored a little higher. But they have a prioritized list. One of the questions was, do you believe it's important to maintain the paint color on your property while you're doing repairs? And we asked, remember, we didn't understand this question, and so we asked about it. And they said, well, what they're really referring to is that as you're making repairs, you keep the color consistent. They're not saying you can't change the color. They're just saying they don't want, the repair to be one color and something to be something else. Then they talked about how important you thought it was if people stored rubbish in their front yard, or hazardous materials, or scrap metals, or broken machinery. And those things rank pretty high. I think it pretty much people in their own community don't want to see a bunch of storage of junk around the area. Here's one that I couldn't even believe they asked. Do you think that a person who illegally dumps rubbish, hazardous waste, scrap metal, broken machinery, et cetera, should be responsible for the code violation?
Along with the property.
Yeah, well, I think they're the primary, the people that do the task, that commit the crime, are the ones that should be responsible, right? That's true. So, and I was surprised it was as low as 79% said yes. The other thing was a discussion of maintaining residential properties free of inoperative vehicles. And they talked about inoperative vehicles being, cars, trucks, motorcycles, cycles, boats, et cetera, about being parked in your driveway. But the key word here is inoperative. So they weren't talking about you couldn't park a boat in your driveway, couldn't park a trailer in your driveway. But if it looks like it's inoperative and it looks like it's decaying, then they're probably going to come and ask you to move it. Here they talked about what it is they thought, and here is what do you think is a proper thing to cover your front yard with? And surprisingly enough, in a prioritized result, and by the way, I was a little confused about this rating, 1.52, 2.15, 3.40. So I've asked for the raw data for this survey so I can understand what they're doing. I haven't got it yet. So they said, most people want a lawn or decorative plants. I think that's pretty much a no-brainer. Then a lawn, then decorative bark, and then gravel or decorative rocks. And we've talked to them a lot that gravel is a problem. And they, in our area specifically, they had some people put gravel in their parkway on their route to school. How long do you think that stays there? It ends up in the street. And then people get to clean it up. So we've been talking, we also talked about decorative bark because what happens to decorative bark when it rains? It floats and goes wherever the water goes. So even where they've been putting it all along Soledad, pretty soon then you see it in the street and someone's got to go clean it up. So we made note about that and talked to them about probably that's not a great idea. Should the city of Santa Clarita issue permits for construction while the requesting property owner has an active code violation? Well, if you don't do that, that's pretty unrealistic. So, you could take it to the extreme. I use the extreme example when I talk to them. I said, oh yeah, you got a code violation that says you got trash cans in the public view, so you're going to tell someone they can't repair their roof? You know what's going to happen if you do that? They're going to repair it anyway. All right, so that just seems a little unrealistic. And by the way, we had that occur right catty corner for me, where I had a lady that wanted to put a patio cover off the side of her house. And she went down to planning and went to go get the permit, went to go pull a permit with the contractor. And they said, no, you can't pull a permit because you have a part of your house that has non-permitted use. And so she came to me and asked me, and I said, well, you know what? Hey, they said we have a friend at City Hall. Let's go on down there and let's confess. And let's see what it takes to fix the problem. Well, after 6 months, she gave up. So she just went and did something else. So it's unrealistic to turn around and do things like this and expect that you're going to make things better. You can't hold people hostage for one thing when something else is wrong. Here's another one. Should a parent or guardian be responsible for damages done by their kids? I thought we already were. But that's okay. That's not maybe they hadn't figured that out yet. Results of the survey is how long do you think it should be before people are required to remove graffiti? And I thought it was very interesting because I didn't answer 7 days, which is what it was. But by the time I heard the arguments, I agreed that 7 days was the right amount of time because we started talking about, weekends. And if you're a homeowner and you're working, maybe you can't fix it until the weekend. Maybe if you're a business owner and it happens and you're closed on the weekend, you probably don't even know about it till Monday. So they pretty well agreed that 7 days was the right amount. Now they finally prioritized what people thought of as the most to the least important things that they should do. And one is poorly maintained private properties. I think that's what we always talked about as dilapidated construction, illegal dumping, temporary signs in the right-of-way, then weed abatement, then garage conversion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Top 5 items. I'm sure that surprised them. And so they then started to talk about code changes. And I said, well, this is what you're talking about? This is what we've been waiting for? because we've been talking to these people about the extreme neighborhood makeover and proactive code enforcement, again, since 2007 when they first started it. And one of the things we talked to them about is, what are you going to do for existing neighborhoods when you generate a new code? So the guys go down here at City Hall and they say, you know what, new construction, I think it'd really be nice if we do this. Well, that doesn't change any existing home, none, right? And so we were looking for something in these code changes that would take care of that problem, but that's not what we got. We did ask when they talked about changing definitions that they take all the definitions in all of the UDCs and put them in one place. Because currently, if you go through the UDCs, terms are defined differently depending upon in which UDC you're talking about. And so you start in a conversation with a code enforcement guy and you say, well, this is what this means. And they go, no. And then they pull out a different definition from a different section. So and they agreed that it should all be in one area. I still don't think clotheslines in the front yard are a really important problem. But one of the other things that they talked about was a lien procedure. Now, a while ago at City Hall, probably, I don't know, a year or two ago, they talked about changing the lien procedure so that the city manager could initiate the lien rather than having to go to the council. And here they brought it up again. Now let's have the ability of the city manager to initiate the lien. And that met with a resounding amount of negativity. So it didn't go over very big, and hopefully when we see these go to the Planning Commission, they will not be included. So since 2007, we've been discussing of a method of exempting or modifying enforcements of new codes to preserve the flavor of existing neighborhoods. The one thing that the city of Santa Cruz is extremely bad at is writing a new code and not assessing the effect on existing neighborhoods. They pretty much are always worried about new construction. And then they say, well, it doesn't bother you because your home's already there, unless you decide to change something, and then you may find out that something that all your neighbors have, you can no longer do because something changed in the codes. So, and everybody should realize that whenever they produce a code, whenever they produce a UDC or they produce a code, along with that code comes an enforcement policy. And the only one I know that they made public was, if you remember, the oversized vehicle parking ordinance. You guys remember that? Well, they actually generated an enforcement policy that went along with that, published it, and the Sheriff's Department handed it out. So it says exactly how they're going to go and handle that. So we said, how about that? And how about making it visible to the public? Some way of handling special circumstances. I mean, there are some places where, you know what, I know the code says this, but because of some special circumstance, it's just not going to work. Okay? And the area that we talked about was the corner of Stillmore and White's Canyon, and where the kids all congregate to go to school. You can just imagine that the parkways there don't grow very well because they got kids trampling over them all the time. So maybe that's a special circumstance. Maybe you should be able to have some kind of a variation for that. Because these are the promises that have been made to us throughout the years. And I didn't want to go into too much detail. I just want you to understand that we have been playing this game for a very long time. In 2008, they agreed to negotiate and document the enforcement goals and policies, and they really did. For the first extreme neighborhood makeover, they did that. We were supposed to update them every 2 months. It never happened. And actually, when the management changed in code enforcement area, it never got moved to the new individual. Then they said, oh, this was Paul Brotzman. He said, not a problem. No problem. We can document these things with something called director's policies and put them online. And so then every 2 months after that, I'd call him up and say, online yet? And it never happened. Then, when the extreme neighborhood makeover ran into a brick wall in the Benelli tract in Saugus, and they generated an individual survey for the Benelli tract, where they had the meeting to explain what the results were at the park on Seco. They promised. We said, hey, you're going to do the same thing for us? And they said, oh, absolutely. Each area is going to get this survey, and we'll find out what you guys want, and then based upon what you want is what we'll do. Well, that never happened. And then they said, you know what? Code changes will come out with the One Valley, One Vision code changes. You just have to wait a while. That was another year. And then Lisa Hardy, the planning manager, said to me, don't worry about it, Al. The code changes for you will be out by the spring of 2012. And the spring of 2012 came, and we said, where are they? And they said, well, wait a minute, guys. It's going to come out with the planning changes in the fall of 2012. So I went to the planning meeting, asked the question, where are those changes? They said, oh, no. It's the code guys that are going to do this. It's the code guys that are going to do this, and they'll tell you when they run their survey. And then when I talk to the code guys, they say, no, we're not going to do that at all. Maybe we'll use special standards districts. Could you imagine? I don't know if you understand how special standards districts work, but that would be a bureaucratic nightmare. So here's what we're we went on and we had those discussions. But they were very, very, there was another gentleman in our group besides me that was very adamant about, he was a fireman, he was on the other side, very adamant about code methodology changes for existing neighborhoods. But we did get some clarifications because there's been this constant battle about what is your front yard? And should it be landscaped or should it be hardscaped? And so at first someone said, well, you know what, your front yard is from the front of your house to your sidewalk. And I said, no, it's from the setback to your sidewalk. Because anything behind the setback, it doesn't fall into that. You're trying to tell me that if I want to pour a slab outside my front door to have a picnic table on, I can't do it. It has to be. And then they agreed, yes, the construction, your ability to do permitted construction starts at the end of the setback. At the setback. So for most people, it's the end of where the end of their garage is typically 20 feet or more from the curb, from your sidewalks, and that is your setback. And the distance from the setback to your house is fair game for construction. So that was one of the discussions, and I thought it was interesting because it kind of surprised them. That's true. They don't comply with the code either. So the other surprise happened when we found out that the code enforcement methodology had changed. I mean, I just recently, as 4 months ago, had neighbors that came and complained to me and showed me these letters that they got from code enforcement where you get a first letter, and if you don't meet your obligation, you get a second letter. And after that, you were supposed to get a citation, an administrative citation, and so on and so forth. But now they decide, well, no, we're changing that. I said, well, how does anybody know what your processes are? So they said that we have a handbook online, and we'll let you know where it is. And so we're continuing to ask. So here are our next steps for this. One, Curtis Williams was supposed to put the proposed new ordinances online. I talked to him about a week ago, and he was about ready to do it. But I went and called him at the beginning of this week, but he's on vacation. So we'll wait till he gets back. Cruz Caldera was supposed to provide the raw survey data and a link to the enforcement handbook or procedures, and I'll hound him until he gives it to us. And lastly, we're again discussing how we're going to handle new codes in existing neighborhoods. We'll talk to have a meeting set up with Robert Newman and the planning department, and we'll talk about code enforcement concerns, what we're going to do about ordinance changes, and the method of accounting for existing neighborhoods. So realize that this may or may not impact you, because somebody may decide that they're going to report you, or the code enforcement guy may just be going down the street and saying, I don't like that, and you're going to get a guy knocking on your door. And I think it's important that we establish these ground rules so we know exactly where we are and what we can do about them. Are there any questions? Can you get the microphone, please?
We participated in the survey and we were at one of the meetings, and my perception is totally different than yours.
Yes?
I think the city is trying to work with people. I think that if you go to Curtis, our crews, and talk to them one-on-one if you have an issue, they're open to work with you, not just to say, no way, you can't do that. That's not my perception of that meeting that I had. I went to the first meeting, not to the last meeting. But,
Well, that's good. That's
my
interesting.
feeling is that they're very willing to work with the residents. That's the way the city is. That's their philosophy. And I don't, I think some of this is very cynical and very slanted. I don't see a city employee from code enforcement here offering the other side, and I think that that would be very beneficial to all of us.
Well, we've been dealing with this for a very, very long time, and I think some of the issues, I can understand what you're saying, but I think some of the issues is, and right from the very start, remember this started in 2007. We've been playing this game since 2007. Never do one side of a street. Never send your proactive code enforcement guys down one side of a street and write things up, because people turn around and say, what about the guys on the other side of the street? And you have to realize that the extreme neighborhood makeover, as it exists today, started in 2008 on the corner of Walnut Springs and Nearbrook. And the commitment was that they would go through with our agreement as to what they were going to do. They were going to go through the lower North Oaks area in 6 months. It has now been 6 years, and they're not done. What? Excuse me?
They are not rehiring anybody in the city. People are leaving the city. They have staffing issues. They can't do it all. That's my perception.
Well, I think you're right.
I think they're doing the best they can.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely correct. And actually, every time we've gone to the city about this, that's one of the things that we have continually talked about, is the fact that they do not have enough staff for this. And not only don't they have enough staff for this, but they start a project knowing they don't have enough staff, and then they pull them off and they start a different project. So they never get done. And that's not a good way to do business.